A simple woman was told to wait, outside the very class she once designed for others. Denied a seat, dismissed without cause. But silence wasn't surrender. Next day, the same quiet presence returned, not with noise, but with proof. And before anyone could speak, the entire company stood still. Because when a simple woman is pushed aside, the foundation itself begins to shake. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The California sun had a particular glow that morning at LAX, casting long shadows through the terminal's glass walls, making the floors shimmer with a kind of synthetic grace. Shaquille O'Neal moved through the airport like a ghost in plain sight. A black hoodie hung low over his forehead, aviator sunglasses cloaking his eyes, shoulders broad and unmistakable even beneath the casual layers. Most walked past him without a second glance, only a few double takes from security or die-hard fans who weren't entirely sure. Fame had taught him how to vanish in plain sight when he needed to. He wasn't running late. That wasn't his style. He'd arrived early, checked in without a word, and positioned himself at gate B9, leaning slightly against the windowed wall, headphones resting around his neck, but no music playing. He liked to listen to people, their voices, their nervous laughter before takeoff, the click of business shoes against tile. Today his eyes fell on a woman, walking toward the first-class lane. She wasn't dressed like the other first-class passengers. No silk scarf, no tailored suit. Her clothes were neat but worn. Blazer too big at the shoulders, shoes slightly scuffed, hair pulled back with the kind of precision that comes from necessity, not vanity. Her name, printed boldly on her boarding pass, was Delilah Ray. There was something about the way she moved, confident yet careful, like someone used to entering rooms that questioned her right to be there. Delilah approached the gate with a calm expression and extended her ticket. The agent looked at it, hesitated, then glanced up with that split-second flicker one Shaq had seen too many times before. Not hate, not overt rejection, just doubt disguised as policy. "I think you might be in the wrong line, ma'am," the agent said with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Delilah pointed to the ticket, voice steady but quiet. "It says 2A, first class." Another pause. The agent tilted her head, then typed something into her terminal, longer than needed. Behind Delilah, other passengers started shifting. A man in a pressed navy suit cleared his throat. A woman behind him rolled her eyes and looked down at her Rolex. The agent finally handed Delilah's ticket back with a smile that felt more like dismissal than apology. "Actually, there's been a change," she said. "You've been reassigned to seat 18C. It's still a window." Delilah didn't argue, not because she agreed, but because some part of her had expected this. She nodded once, softly, as if she were apologizing for something she hadn't done, and moved away from the gate. Shaq watched the entire thing unfold, watched her steps lose their rhythm, watched her tuck the boarding pass into her purse like it might vanish if she ignored it long enough. Her shoulders tightened, her face neutralized into something unbothered. But Shaq had played too many games, watched too many fans fake smiles. He knew the real kind, and hers, the one she gave when she first approached, was gone. He didn't move, didn't speak, but something inside him stirred. The boarding announcement came 5 minutes later. First class first. He moved with the others now. Boarding pass scanned. A nod from the gate agent, who hadn't recognized him until he was halfway down the jet bridge. Inside, leather seats waited, champagne already bubbling in slender glasses. Shaq didn't drink. He just sat, 1C, headphones on but no music still, eyes staring straight ahead. Delilah walked by moments later. He saw her hesitate when she passed row 2, a flicker of what could have been anger or resignation. She didn't look at him, didn't look at anyone, just kept walking down that narrow aisle until she reached economy. Shaq leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, but he didn't feel relaxed. Not today. That moment at the gate, it wasn't new. He'd seen worse. He'd experienced worse. But there was something about the quiet of it, the subtle way it had been wrapped in customer service language and corporate indifference. It wasn't loud. It wasn't overt. But it cut just the same. And Delilah, she hadn't made a scene. She hadn't demanded her seat or called out the injustice. That was what disturbed him the most. She didn't expect fairness. The flight was uneventful. No turbulence, no delays, but the discomfort that settled in Shaq's chest didn't lift, even when the wheels touched down on Orlando's hot tarmac. The car service was waiting outside, A polished black SUV with tinted windows and cold bottles of water resting in the cup holders. But before Shaq climbed in, he turned back and glanced at the airport doors. He didn't know if Delilah had already left. Didn't know if he'd ever see her again. But he knew her name. He remembered it from the boarding pass. And something about the way her hands clutched her bag, the way her smile disappeared, had carved itself into the back of his mind like a note left on a mirror. The next morning, that note turned into a search. Shaq sat in his home office, sunlight flooding the hardwood floors, the smell of coffee lingering in the air. He pulled up his laptop, started typing, Delilah Ray. The first results were predictable. Social media profiles, a few public records, nothing substantial. But after digging deeper, something stood out. A LinkedIn profile. Sparse, barely active. Former title, Senior Hospitality Design Executive, or XAir Airlines. Tenure, 14 years. Last post, left the company to focus on personal goals. Shaq clicked again, opened old press releases, scanned photos of board meetings and employee awards. Delilah had once been a major figure in the company, a leading voice in creating inclusive human-centered passenger experiences. Her designs were praised for combining empathy with efficiency. Then suddenly, nothing. She'd vanished from the company a year ago. No press about her departure. No interviews. Just that one final line. Left to focus on personal goals. Shaq leaned back in his chair. Something wasn't adding up. You don't go from shaping national travel experiences to getting rerouted to coach, unless someone made sure of it. He kept digging. Contacted a friend in Atlanta, who worked with airline analytics. Asked subtle questions. What did they know about Rexair's recent internal shifts? Had they changed leadership? Were there lawsuits pending? The friend didn't say much, but his tone changed when Delilah's name came up. She didn't just leave, he muttered. She found something. Something real. But they buried it. Shaq knew what that looked like. He'd seen it in sports, in media, in contracts rewritten and reputations altered. This wasn't just a one-time oversight at the gate. This was systemic, and now the woman who had once designed first-class spaces was sitting in coach while the company that dismissed her thrived off her blueprints. He sat with that knowledge for a long time. Let it simmer. Let it burn. Later that day, he called someone he trusted, a journalist who owed him a favor. Told her everything he'd seen. Told her about Delilah Ray, the gate, the reassignment. He didn't exaggerate, didn't dramatize, just laid it out clean. She didn't belong in coach, he said finally, but they made her feel like she didn't belong anywhere. That was the moment it shifted. The story wasn't about him. It wasn't even about the airline yet. It was about the quiet force of a woman who once smiled like she believed the world could be kind, and how that smile had been taken from her by a machine too smooth to catch, unless someone watched closely. Shaq wasn't just watching now. He was moving. Because some moments haunt you, not with noise, but with silence. And this one had been silent long enough. Shaq opened his laptop and started where any businessman would. A search. Delilah Ray turned up the same results as before. But now he dug deeper, cross-referencing patents, archived corporate press releases, design blogs, internal newsletters from aviation expos. Within hours, the woman who had quietly returned to obscurity began to emerge in full light. 5 years ago, Delilah Ray had been the face of Rexair's hospitality revolution. She was featured in industry panels, photographed beside luxury suite mock-ups, celebrated for her radical concept of invisible comfort, a way of blending inclusivity into design without turning it into a sales pitch. Her approach had made waves. Upgraded seating for passengers with physical limitations, discrete sensory support for travelers with anxiety, warm lighting cabins, calibrated to help black and brown passengers show up better on in-flight facial recognition systems. She didn't just redesign spaces, she redefined belonging. And then nothing. Her profile dropped off the grid a year ago. No farewell post. No new employer. No industry buzz. It wasn't a graceful exit. It was an erasure. Shaq picked up his phone and called an old friend, Vincent Greer, a legal consultant, who specialized in corporate compliance and whistleblower protection. The two had crossed paths years ago on a housing equity project. Vince answered on the second ring. "You only call when something smells off," he said. "No hello needed." "I think someone's trying to disappear a woman who built $500 million worth of customer loyalty." Shaq replied. "You're gonna have to be more specific." Delilah Ray, or Xair. First-class specialist turned ghost. There was a pause. The kind that usually meant a name had landed too heavy. I know the case, Vince finally said, but it never made it to court. Something about an NDA, and a mutual separation agreement. Legal handcuffs. She was buried clean. Shaq leaned forward. Buried why? That's what makes it slippery, Vince said. The rumor, strictly off record, was that she uncovered something in their passenger analytics program. Something unethical. But there was no leak. No press. Whatever it was, they kept it quiet, bought silence the way these companies always do, through legalese and fear. Shaq didn't reply immediately. His mind was moving faster than his mouth could follow. If Delilah had seen something, and they'd buried her to keep it hidden, it wasn't just about first class anymore. It was about erasing the people who knew too much. He thanked Vince and hung up, then grabbed his keys and left the house without telling anyone where he was going. By late afternoon, he was in the sleek lobby of a downtown Orlando tech consultancy that quietly powered much of the infrastructure behind Orexair's passenger data. It was all perfectly legal. On paper, at least. Shaq wasn't here to expose anyone yet. He was here to ask questions, and his name opened doors that most could never knock on. The company's executive assistant greeted him with careful polish. "Mr. O'Neill, what a surprise. May I ask what this visit pertains to?" Shaq offered his trademark grin. "I'm doing some early legwork for a potential equity investment in consumer-facing travel systems. Thought I'd get a lay of the land." She blinked, nodded, and escorted him to a small conference room. 10 minutes later, he was face-to-face with Trevor Vance, the firm's head of integration design, slim, eager, and 2 cups into his third espresso. Shaq kept it easy. He talked about the importance of trust in data, the necessity of ethics when managing facial recognition and personalization. Trevor agreed, effusively. The conversation drifted naturally to partnership. "Your team worked with Orexair, right?" Shaq asked casually. "Oh yeah, big client. We helped them build their dynamic ticketing and biometric match systems." "Did Delilah Ray oversee any of that?" Trevor hesitated, surprised by the name. She was involved early on. Yeah, brilliant. But she got reassigned or resigned, or something. Honestly, I thought she'd be running the whole show by now." Shaq tilted his head. "You ever hear of something called the Mosaic Protocol?" Trevor's eyes flickered. It was brief, but unmistakable. "I think that was one of the internal algorithms for customer sorting. Not my area, though." Shaq let the silence stretch. Trevor looked away. "I just heard, mind you, that there were issues. That Delilah didn't like the way some of the data was being used. Felt it was being layered with unintended bias." "Unintended?" "Some of the weighting algorithms started downgrading passengers automatically. Travel history, demographic predictions, all tied to a risk score. Looked neutral on paper, but in practice, well, it wasn't. And no one stopped it." Trevor exhaled. "She tried, but by then it was already live." Shaq stood slowly, nodded once, and thanked him. The meeting ended politely, but he walked out feeling anything but calm. Delilah hadn't just been reassigned. She'd seen a machine built to serve, start selecting. She'd tried to fix it, and instead of praise, she got erased. Back at his car, Shaq sat for a long moment. The engine idled. His phone buzzed. A message from Vince. "You were right. NDA includes personal liability clause." They didn't just silence her. They threatened her. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Not because he wanted to act impulsively, but because he realized how deep the rot went. Orexair's entire brand was wrapped in the language of inclusion. Their ads ran diverse. Their messaging was polished. But underneath, they'd licensed a system that punished people quietly, efficiently, elegantly. That's what made it so dangerous. He called Vince back. What would happen if someone else started asking questions? Someone with reach. "You mean a journalist?"
No. Bigger. Public opinion. Footage.
Evidence. A case built not in courtrooms but on phones. TikTok. Late-night monologues. Documented in the language people actually care about now. Vince didn't laugh. "You're planning something." Shaq didn't answer directly. "She doesn't want revenge. But this system doesn't get to keep swallowing people whole." He looked out over the city skyline as the sun began to dip behind steel towers and glass offices. The same buildings that gave people power and took it away in equal measure. Orexair had built its brand on courtesy, but courtesy, he knew, wasn't kindness. It was compliance. A smile that hides a knife. And now that knife had a name. Delilah Ray. And it was time the world remembered it. The headquarters of Orexair didn't look like a company with secrets. It stood tall and sleek in downtown Atlanta, glass and metal merging into a high-rise beacon of modernity. The logo glistened on the side of the building like a seal of trust, minimalist and refined. It was the kind of architecture meant to assure visitors of transparency, progress, excellence. But Shaq had walked through enough polished lobbies to know that what gleamed on the outside was often meant to blind, not reveal. He entered through the revolving doors just past 9 on a Monday morning, dressed not in his usual laid-back gear, but a crisp charcoal suit, tailored to precision. He shook hands, smiled wide, and made sure every greeting was warm enough to disarm, but firm enough to establish that he was not here to be entertained. The staff was on alert the moment his name hit the appointment calendar. Shaquille O'Neal, billionaire philanthropist and public figure, had requested a private meeting with the company's Innovation and Experience division. He was exploring a partnership to sponsor equitable aviation design for underrepresented communities, a philanthropic initiative tied to youth aviation programs and culturally adaptive cabin experiences. They loved it. Of course they did. That kind of branding made them look good. But as Shaq shook the hand of Marla Keene, head of client-facing experience strategies, and walked past pristine white halls framed with motivational quotes and sleek digital dashboards, he kept his real agenda folded behind his smile, like a razor tucked in a velvet glove. The conference room they brought him to had an open skyline view, chilled water bottles with the Orexair logo, and a presentation preloaded on the screen. Marla sat at the head of the table, flanked by two directors, Eric Langdon and Sasha V. They were polished, polite, and entirely too eager to present a narrative. Shaq let them. They opened with a slide deck. Infographics danced across the screen. Year-over-year passenger satisfaction, increasing loyalty numbers, predictive convenience models, biometric boarding processes. Words like efficiency, comfort equity, and adaptive service tiers floated across the air-conditioned room like friendly ghosts. Shaq leaned back, nodded at the right times, even laughed once. But after 20 minutes he folded his hands and tilted his head slightly. "Tell me more about the Mosaic Initiative," he said, voice casual, curious, completely calm. The room paused, only for a fraction of a second, but it was there. A flicker of confusion, or perhaps the memory of a word they'd all agreed never to speak out loud again. Sasha recovered first. "Oh, that was a pilot framework for passenger personalization. It was never formally launched. But it was built, wasn't it?" Shaq asked, eyes on her, still gentle. "I've heard it was rather predictive." Marla stepped in, smiling tightly. "It was an early experiment, yes, internal only. We pivoted away from that model due to data concerns." Shaq tapped his fingers on the table. "What kind of concerns?" "Just optimization hiccups. Weighting variables didn't yield equitable outputs. We reevaluated the architecture and shelved the entire concept." "Did Delilah Ray work on that model?" This time, Eric spoke up. Miss Ray was involved in early-stage advisory. Her focus was on spatial comfort and customer empathy mapping, not data modeling. Shaq didn't respond immediately. He let the silence build like tension before a free throw. Then he leaned forward slightly. "See, that's what confuses me," he said. "Because according to the documentation I've reviewed, Delilah's annotations are all over the passenger tagging logic. Notes about implicit bias detection, rebalancing algorithms, facial scan discrepancy reports. She flagged those hiccups as more than technical glitches. She flagged them as discriminatory. And then she was gone." The table went cold. Shaq didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply stated what he'd found, and the weight of truth did the rest. Eric cleared his throat. "Those documents aren't public." "I know," Shaq said. "They were shared with me by someone who doesn't work here anymore. Funny thing about people who leave companies angry, they don't always delete the receipts."
No one laughed.
Shaq stood and walked toward the window, taking in the skyline before turning back to them. "Let me be clear, I'm not here to file a complaint. I'm not here to sue. I'm here because Delilah Ray didn't just walk away from your company. You pushed her out when she tried to stop a system that turned data science into modern segregation." Marla's composure cracked just slightly. "We can't speak on terminated agreements." "But I can," Shaq replied. "And I will. You've built a company that markets itself on diversity while running protocols that punish people for looking like me. You call it optimization, but it's elegant exclusion. And Delilah saw it for what it was, and you silenced her. He didn't wait for a rebuttal. The meeting ended there. He didn't storm out. He thanked them politely, took the elevator down without a word, and walked back through the white hallways that now felt like a mausoleum for every buried objection. As he drove away, his mind flickered back to Delilah's resignation document, the one Vince had secured a copy of. In it there was a section with vague legal phrasing, but one paragraph stood out. It referred to her concerns over internal algorithmic inconsistency, resulting in disproportionate inconvenience metrics to marginalized demographics. It was sanitized language, corporate sedative, but what it meant was simple. She had told them the system was racist, and instead of fixing it, they muted her. That night Shaq sat alone in his study. No TV, no music, just a cup of peppermint tea, and a laptop open to a private drive, where he'd compiled everything. He had emails from former staffers, early Mosaic framework notes, side-by-side ticket analytics showing how passengers with identical profiles were flagged and downgraded, if they were Black, or Muslim, or Latino. Delilah hadn't just noticed the system, she'd tried to rewrite it, and they'd written her out instead. He opened one video file. It was grainy, shot on a phone during an internal training seminar, 2 years prior. Delilah was standing at a podium in front of a room of young engineers, her voice steady, eyes lit with quiet fire. When we design for convenience, she said, we have to ask, convenient for whom? Efficiency at the cost of fairness isn't innovation, it's automation of injustice. And if we don't build for equity, then we're not architects, we're enablers. Shaq watched it twice, then 3 times. She had seen it all before anyone else, and she had warned them. Now it was his turn. The next morning, he placed 2 phone calls. The first was to Vince. It's time, he said. Let's start documenting everything. Legally. Strategically. Clean. The second was to a woman named Cameron Shaw, a filmmaker and digital activist with a ruthless eye for exposing corporate hypocrisy through short-form narrative media. She'd taken down 2 companies with nothing more than editing skills and truth. When Shaq told her about Delilah Ray, she said 5 words. Send me everything you've got. Within hours, they were building a campaign. Not a flashy one. A precise one. The kind of story that started soft but drilled deep. The kind that made people care before they even knew what was at stake. As the city lights blinked into view outside his office window, Shaq knew the next chapter would be louder, messier, and far more public. But it wouldn't be about vengeance. It wouldn't be about rage. It would be about truth, and the woman who was punished for telling it. Oryxair had designed white walls and silver lies to sell comfort while hiding corruption. But now those walls had cracks, and Shaq was ready to let the light in. She blinked. Her voice caught. You're Shaquille O'Neal. Yeah, he said. But today, I'm just someone who needed to talk to you. She stared a moment longer, then laughed. It wasn't loud. It cracked like dry leaves. Short, brittle, unexpected. Then just as quickly, her face folded. The tears didn't fall easily. They came like something finally allowed. She turned her back to him, covered her mouth and breathed. Shaq didn't move. He gave her space, not out of politeness, but out of respect for everything she hadn't said yet. After a long moment, she walked around the counter, pulled out a chair at a two-top by the window, and gestured for him to sit. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was calm. You really came all the way here. I needed to, Shaq said. After what I saw, and what I learned. She looked down, nodding faintly. They made me feel like I imagined the whole thing, like I was the problem. You weren't. I know that now. But for a while I didn't. There was silence between them. Not heavy, not awkward, just the kind of silence that exists when 2 people know the world tried to rob them of truth in different ways. Delilah picked up a glass of water from the counter and sipped. Her hands still trembled. Just slightly. I didn't want revenge, you know. That was never the point. I just wanted them to stop building systems that treat people like categories. We're not slots on a grid. We're not risk factors. Shaq nodded. You tried to tell them. She gave a sad smile. And they told me I was emotional, that I was overreaching, that the data was clean and unbiased, and neutral. Neutral, she said again, scoffing. Like the people who write code don't bring their prejudice into the parameters. He leaned forward. You saw it before anyone else. You flagged it. I tried. Her voice dropped. I stayed late for weeks. I rewrote modules. I met with ethics officers. And when none of that worked, I documented everything. You know what they did? I do. They gave me a raise, called it gratitude. Then they buried the project under another name and made me sign an NDA. Said if I ever spoke about it, I'd be sued for defamation. Said it would cost me everything. It already did, Shaq said. Delilah looked at him now. Steady. But it didn't cost me my soul. That was the line I wouldn't cross. Shaq breathed out slowly. You were right. About everything. The system was launched under a different internal label. It wasn't shelved. It was scaled, rebranded as Mosaic 2.0, and sold to international partners. And the worst part, they called it an achievement in culturally adaptive service. Her face hardened. They always dress cruelty in clever words. I've started putting together a team. People who can prove this. Not in court, not yet. In public. With voices. With stories. With receipts. Delilah leaned back, cautious. I don't want a spotlight. You don't need one, he said. But you deserve the truth to stand where they tried to bury it. She looked away, out the window, at the slow traffic of Savannah rolling by like time itself. Do you really think people will care? Shaq didn't answer with words. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his phone, and played a short clip. A segment from a podcast that had aired the night before. A cultural commentator recounting an incident at LAX involving a woman being bumped from first class. The story had leaked, not from him, but from someone else who had been on the flight. The host described her grace, the insult, the silence. They called her the woman with the vanishing smile, Shaq said, locking eyes with her. Delilah shook her head. I never asked for any of this. No, Shaq said. But they took everything anyway. Now it's your turn to choose what gets rebuilt. She sat quiet for a long time, then stood, walked over to a cupboard, and pulled out a worn folder. Inside were pages, some printed, some handwritten, some scribbled with time-stamped notes. She handed it to him. This is everything I didn't delete. Every pattern I saw, every anomaly. I didn't trust myself to forget it. But I didn't trust the world to care. Shaq took it gently, as if it were made of something sacred. You're not alone anymore. Delilah nodded, her face unreadable now, shielded again, but not hardened. There was still kindness in her, just quieter now, deeper, guarded. As the sky outside dimmed toward evening, she packed up the rest of the kitchen and practiced motion, wiping down the counter, flipping the sign to closed, humming low under her breath, like someone trying to remind herself she was still here. Before Shaq left, she walked him to the door. You said this isn't about revenge, she said softly. So what is it about? He looked at her, eyes steady. Redemption, not just for you, for all the people who don't have the voice, or the reach, or the privilege to be heard. If we don't shine light on this, it keeps happening. Delilah nodded. Then, just before he stepped out, she said something that made him stop cold. You know what broke me, Shaq? Her voice was a whisper now. It wasn't that they didn't listen. It's that they made me question whether I ever said anything at all. He turned and looked at her, and for the first time since they met, her smile returned. Not the bright one from old videos. Not the proud one from her corporate days. But a small, resilient one. The kind that comes back after being gone too long.
You said something, you told her.
And now the world's finally ready to hear it. The problem with power, Shaq had learned, wasn't how loud it spoke. It was how many doors it closed before anyone else could even knock. Behind those polished conference tables and curated statements was a quieter place, a deeper one. A place without clocks or windows. That's where real decisions lived. That's where people like Delilah Ray were erased. But not this time. Shaq didn't go public. Not yet. That wasn't the move. This required precision. He needed truth, not shouted, but proven. So he called in the kind of help that didn't make headlines but made cases. The team arrived in unmarked rental cars. No briefcases. No ties. These weren't loud litigators. They were silent strategists. A lean legal unit, headed by Kellen Price, a data privacy savant with a habit of asking 3 questions before saying a single word. Kellen specialized in digital ethics violations, particularly ones buried under acceptable use clauses and internal experimental tools. Shaq laid it out for him. The pattern. The mosaic system. The false shelving. The upgraded bias coded into clean algorithms. Delilah's exile. The erased flags. the cover-up cloaked in courtesy. Kellen didn't blink. "We're not suing." "Exactly," Shaq said. "We're documenting, mapping, building something too complete to ignore." Kellen assembled 2 more investigators, Anitra Baines, an ex-employee of a flight operations analytics firm, who now freelanced as a systems compliance researcher, and Riley Knox, a digital forensics auditor with a quiet disdain for PR language. Together they started threading the needle. The first step was testimonies. Not public ones. Private. Quiet. Real. They reached out to Brett Tilden, a former data engineer who'd left Orexair 6 months earlier after a personal ethics misalignment. The NDA he signed was airtight, but Brett was angry. Not recklessly so, but bruised in the way truth-tellers often are. In a secured meeting room 2 blocks from a strip mall in Jacksonville, he handed over a copy of internal analytics protocol documentation, not the polished ones from the deck, the draft files, the ones with annotations that were supposed to be deleted before submission. They contained internal memos tied to a system labeled CRISPR-Pax, the real name buried behind Mosaic. It stood for Customer Risk and Influence Segmentation Predictive Allocation Experience. The system used a blend of behavioral data, travel frequency, facial recognition scores, and public influence rank to predict passenger value. At first glance, it sounded innovative. But deeper in the files was a hidden field. Flag Alpha. Shaq and Kellen both stared at the column. It auto-tagged profiles for further verification when certain risk triggers were met. Late check-ins, seat change requests, loyalty points anomalies. But what raised alarms was how disproportionately those triggers aligned with racially coded markers, especially when paired with generic names that didn't trend toward traditionally Anglo spelling. It wasn't just class-based sorting. It was systemic bias baked into optimization logic. One note in the file had a familiar voice. Flag Alpha's algorithm is misaligned with equitable service principles, recommending immediate suspension pending bias audit. D-Ray. Delilah had seen it, flagged it, and then vanished. The team moved fast, now. They contacted Lorenzo Mears, a janitorial contractor who'd cleaned executive floors during late board meetings. He remembered things, not because he listened, but because people forgot he was there. He recalled a conversation between 2 directors on the 14th floor, one asking if the Mosaic file risk weights had been adjusted before Q4 reporting. Another witness, Mira Caldwell, had worked as a junior comms assistant, fired after she asked why certain press releases had to be rewritten to remove references to data refinement technology. She agreed to talk, off record, and admitted to sending 2 memos to HR that disappeared before she got her termination letter. Kellen began to build the timeline. At the core of it was a pattern of strategic omission. Mosaic, or CRISPR-Pax, had been pitched internally as a tool to help match passengers with curated experiences. But behind closed doors, it did more than suggest preferences. It reassigned seats, canceled upgrades, flagged boarding delays, and even adjusted loyalty rankings. What passengers experienced as random glitches were actually risk-adjusted corrections, disproportionately affecting Black, Hispanic, and Muslim-identifying passengers based on correlated digital behaviors. Shaq reviewed the files in his study late one night. Alone. There were lists. Lists of flagged customers. One name caught him cold. Delilah Ray. Flagged after her employment ended. Tagged under public narrative containment risk. They didn't just push her out. They marked her, in case she ever came back. His hands clenched. Not in rage, but in recognition. This wasn't personal anymore. This was surgical. This was calculated inequality, built into design, and it wasn't isolated. Kellen's team cross-referenced data shared with partner airlines and found that similar systems had been mirrored, slightly renamed but functionally identical. Orexair hadn't just buried the protocol. They licensed it, quietly, anonymously, internationally. They brought in one more voice. Jordan Liscombe, a systems tester, who'd run flight scenario simulations, and noticed that passengers with the same behavioral patterns but different ethno-linguistic names often had different efficiency scores. He brought screenshots, flagged scripts, and a single email sent from a director to HR that read, "Ray is raising concerns again. We need to find a clean exit strategy. Don't let her walk out angry." Shaq leaned back from the table as that email was read aloud in their strategy room. "They didn't silence her," he said quietly. "They engineered her erasure." Delilah sat in the room too. For the first time. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded. "They wanted quiet," she said. "They'll get the opposite." They began to design their own timeline, but not a legal one. A narrative one. Built for exposure. Structured for resonance. The facts would hold, but the story would lead. Cameron Shaw, the digital filmmaker, joined them on day 4. She had a unique philosophy. Don't make the audience angry. Make them feel responsible. That was her approach. And she started with interviews. Off camera at first. Then sound bites, then contrast footage. Smiling flight attendants overlaid with metadata diagrams. Happy passengers juxtaposed with lines of code adjusting risk markers under their photos. The goal wasn't to tear down a company. It was to unmask a blueprint of exclusion. Shaq understood the stakes. He wasn't naive. He knew what corporate boards feared most. Not litigation, not protest. Exposure. The kind that shifted markets. The kind that made customers choose other skies. The boardroom at ORXAir, the one with the frosted glass and strategic mood lighting, had no windows by design. Not just to look sleek, but to block out everything that didn't align with their view of success. But now, that boardroom was surrounded by truths. With edges. Shaq stood with Kellen and the others at the strategy wall they'd built in a private office in Atlanta. The dates were lined up, the documents pinned, the testimonies annotated. They didn't need speculation anymore. They had proof. And soon, they'd have something even more powerful. A voice that couldn't be redirected. Because Delilah Ray hadn't stood alone at that gate. And now, she wouldn't stand alone at the front of this movement either. The white passenger, Grant Halstead, a volunteer actor and former hospitality consultant, had been fully briefed. Calm demeanor, simple attire, clean ID trail, no personal variables to skew results. The black passenger, Miles Edrick, matched him in every measurable way down to birthday and travel history. Their social presence had been adjusted to neutral tones, no political affiliations, no identity flags. They'd booked the flights through the same ORXAir online portal. At the same time, from the same IP address, side by side in Shaq's studio office. Within minutes, Grant's upgrade confirmation arrived. Miles's, still pending. It took 26 hours before Miles's confirmation showed. By then, the aircraft manifest had changed. He was bumped to a lower-tier cabin. Random? The same pattern had repeated in 4 test runs. But this time, they had cameras, hidden ones. Strategically placed at every step of the journey. The check-in counter, the boarding gate, the priority lane. Even a lapel cam embedded in Miles's jacket button. Observers posing as staff logged every word, every expression, every redirect. Shaq didn't watch the test live. He wanted distance. He wanted the results to stand without his weight tilting the scale. But the night the footage was compiled, he sat in front of the screen for hours, watching, rewinding, watching again. Gate agent hesitates when Miles scans his pass. Pulls him aside. Random security check, she says, smiling like it's routine. Grant walks past 2 seconds later. No stop, no delay. At the lounge, Grant's access works. Miles's card reads, insufficient tier for entry. The staff checks, double checks, then shrugs. Could be a system glitch, they say. They offer him a voucher for a coffee outside the lounge. One employee doesn't even make eye contact. And then the final cut, boarding. Grant is greeted by name. Welcome, Mr. Halstead. Miles's pass beeps red. He's asked to wait, no explanation. Then, after a few keystrokes, he's reassigned from seat. Nothing loud. Nothing aggressive. But everything clear. The algorithm had spoken. And it spoke in polite programmed discrimination. Shaq closed the laptop and sat in the silence of his home theater. It wasn't rage that moved through him. It was sorrow. Quiet and relentless. Like watching someone get pushed off a cliff in slow motion while smiling for a photo. Delilah sat beside him, arms crossed, not in defense but in restraint. She hadn't spoken since the footage started. No, she did. They'll say it's circumstantial. They always do, Shaq said. Unless we control the story. He turned to her. We do that. There's no going back. Not for either of us. Delilah didn't flinch. Back to what? Being quiet? Being erased? She stood and walked to the back of the room, where a whiteboard mapped out the larger arc. Footage, evidence, timeline, narration. We need a story, she said. One that tells itself before they can twist it. That was when Shaq made the decision. Not to lead with lawsuits. Not to go to court. But to speak directly. Honestly. To everyone. No rage. No scandal. Just truth. A bedtime story told from a place of experience and grief. A story about doors that should open, and the hands that quietly close them. Cameron Shaw, the filmmaker, arrived the next day. She listened to the footage without a word, then nodded once. "We won't over-edit it, won't soundtrack it. We'll let the air between words do the work." She drafted the script with Delilah and Shaq, each word combed through for precision, tone, truth. The shoot was simple. One chair, one room, a single soft light. Shaq sat down in a gray sweater. No suit, no set. Just himself. Bare shoulders. Steady eye. The camera rolled. "I want to tell you a story," he began. "About a woman. Not famous. Not loud. Just someone trying to go where she paid to be. A flight. A gate. A seat in first class. But the system decided she didn't belong there." He paused. Let the silence breathe. "That woman's name was Delilah Ray. She didn't yell. She didn't fight. She just stepped back. That day I didn't do anything. I watched. I've thought about that a lot." More footage followed. Cutaways to Miles and Grant. To Delilah's old design files. To screenshots of flagged passenger logs. To whispers in boardrooms, and the mechanical quiet of injustice. Shaq's voice came back, low and certain. She built spaces meant to hold everyone equally. And when she saw those spaces being turned into sorting boxes, she spoke up. They made sure she wouldn't speak again. Until now. The final shot returned to him. Close up. On it. "We're not tearing anything down. We're just refusing to stay outside the door anymore." The screen faded to black. That was all. No sponsors. No hashtags. No ask. Just the truth. Clean. Delivered like a mirror to anyone brave enough to look in. The video was uploaded at 6:32 a.m. on a Tuesday. No fanfare. No press briefings. Just a single post on Shaq's social page. Captioned only, "It's time." By 10:14 a.m., it had been shared 40,000 times. By lunch, morning shows were playing clips. By evening, it was on network news. But it wasn't the virality that mattered.
It was the comments.
"I've lived this. This happened to my dad last Thanksgiving. They did this to my son, and I thought we were imagining it." Finally, someone said it. Delilah sat at her kitchen table in Savannah, watching the numbers rise. Not just views, but voices. The dam was cracking, and for once, not from force, from truth. The board at Oryx Air held an emergency meeting that night. The internal communication leaks came within 48 hours. Shareholders demanded external audits. Former employees started speaking up. Slowly at first, then like a tide. But none of that was the story. The story was a chair, a woman, a seat denied not out of error, but out of design, and the man who saw it, and chose not to stay silent. The quake hadn't hit yet, but the ground was no longer still. When the video first dropped, it didn't explode. It expanded quietly, like ink soaking into paper, the truth seeping into the corners where people had learned to stop looking. It was a slow burn in a world obsessed with speed, and that's what made it dangerous. Shaq uploaded the story at dawn. No flashy trailer, no advance warning, just the full 8-minute cut posted on all major platforms, Instagram, X, YouTube, and a landing page with a single line at the top. What happens when comfort becomes a code for control? In the first hour, it reached 80,000 views. By noon, the number had climbed past 1 million. What made it spread wasn't the celebrity factor, or even the elegance of the storytelling. It was the clarity. People saw themselves in it, not in the polished studio, but in the subtle pauses, the tone of a man not trying to perform pain, just process it. The footage of Miles and Grant, side by side, equally prepared, equally deserving, turned abstract discrimination into something visible. And Delilah's voice, soft but unflinching, cut through with the kind of resonance that didn't shout it settle. "I tried to say something, and when I did, they made sure I couldn't again," she said. "But I've stopped asking for permission to tell the truth." That single sentence was clipped and posted thousands of times. By early evening, Delilah Ray, Shaq says something, and not random at all, were trending across platforms. Major news outlets ran the story on their evening rotations. Cable anchors dissected the Mosaic Protocol. Airline analysts speculated live. Talk show hosts leaned into the humanity of it, their own travel stories taking new shape under the shadow of what the footage revealed. And in corporate boardrooms from Atlanta to Silicon Valley, panic bloomed in silence. Orexair's official account released a vague three-line response. "We are reviewing the concerns raised and are committed to equity in our passenger experience. We have no further comment at this time." But that was fuel, not water. By the next morning, the company's stock had dropped. Shareholder phones lit up. Executives scrambled into emergency meetings. Internal Slack channels were flooded with screen grabs of Shaq's video and demands from department heads asking, "Did we really greenlight this protocol?" The truth, of course, was messier. CRISPR-Pax, the shadow name behind the Mosaic initiative, had been greenlit 2 years ago as a customer efficiency solution. The language had been crafted so carefully that no single department could be blamed, a masterclass in plausible deniability. But what the video had done was strip away the legal armor. It didn't matter what they intended. What mattered was how it worked. The public didn't need a courtroom. They had the court of clarity. Within 48 hours, 5 former employees anonymously submitted written statements to independent journalists. 3 of them confirmed that Delilah Ray's early warnings were ignored. 1 revealed that internal discouragement incentives were offered to team leads who questioned the risk metrics. The 5th, a member of the diversity and inclusion team, who disclosed that her presentation on algorithmic bias had been pulled minutes before a board meeting with the explanation, "It's not a good look this quarter." The cracks widened. Shaq stayed quiet during the rise. He didn't give interviews. He didn't post follow-ups. He let the video speak. And it kept speaking. Late-night talk shows aired segments, reenacting the flight simulation. Journalists requested interviews with Delilah Ray. She turned them down. She had said what needed to be said. The rest was for the world to process now. But it wasn't just about one woman, or one airline. That was the twist. Stories began surfacing from other passengers. Real people with real receipts. Travelers of color who had been downgraded at the gate, with no explanation. Military veterans whose loyalty statuses were suddenly demoted after years of high-tier flying. Businesswomen who noticed their upgrade offers disappear after uploading updated profile photos. People weren't outraged at the system. They were furious that they'd been made to feel paranoid for noticing it. What had once been brushed off as bad luck, or coincidence, now had context. Within a week, the Senate Transportation Oversight Subcommittee released a public statement requesting an independent audit of Orexair's algorithmic passenger services. 2 class action lawsuits were filed within days, one from a coalition of frequent flyers and another from a group of former employees, alleging systemic suppression of internal complaints. Orexair's interim PR team tried to spin the narrative. They released a new video titled "Our Commitment to All Passengers." Stock footage, scripted testimonials, and upbeat music over vague apologies. But the damage had been done. The public wasn't interested in brand recovery. They wanted accountability. Delilah remained in Savannah, running her kitchen as usual. But the phone didn't stop ringing. Offers came in. Interviews, panel invites, consulting gigs. And she declined them all. She wasn't interested in becoming a brand. She had already been one once. She had worn the company badge, stood on stages, smiled for promotional shoots. She knew the cost of being used as a symbol. This wasn't about reclaiming power. It was about redistributing truth. In a quiet moment, Shaq called her. They hadn't spoken since the video went live. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm something," she replied. "But it's not afraid." He smiled at that. She had always had a way with words. Not dramatic ones, real ones. "They're gonna ask you to fix it," he said. "To consult, to come back and clean it all up." "I'm not cleaning up their mess," she said. "But if I ever walk back in those doors, it'll be to change the locks." The line went quiet for a second. "They're scared now," she added. "They should be," Shaq replied. "But not because they're being cancelled," she said. "Because they're being seen." And she was right. This wasn't cancel culture. No one was screaming for heads. No one was calling for boycotts without facts. The movement wasn't led by rage. It was driven by clarity. Orexair wasn't collapsing. It was being confronted. That distinction mattered. It meant something was shifting, not just in one company, but in the way people viewed technology, travel, power. The next week, Cameron Shaw dropped a follow-up piece, a montage of reactions, not from celebrities, from regular people. A school teacher in Missouri, who watched the video with her class. A barber in Detroit, who said it reminded him of how his mother was treated every holiday season at the airport. A nurse in Phoenix, who said she finally understood why she'd never been able to use her miles the way her coworker did. That video reached 5 million views in 3 days. And behind it all, the Mosaic framework, now exposed for what it truly was, became a cautionary tale for every tech team working on predictive personalization. The phrase became toxic. Consulting firms pulled out of scheduled meetings. Academic journals requested new ethics reviews. And the CEO of Orexair, Michael Traston, a man who had once stood beside Delilah at a company awards gala, resigned quietly with a vague press statement citing a need for reflection. Shaq didn't celebrate. This wasn't a victory lap. This was a reckoning, one that should have never needed to happen in the first place. But it did. And now, something was finally happening in return. A shift, a widening of the lens, a disruption of the quiet discrimination that wore a corporate smile. No one could unsee it now. The silence that followed was long enough to speak volumes, because they had no choice. Because the board was dissolving. Because the shareholders wouldn't accept another polished executive in a recycled suit and a new slogan. Because Delilah had become the story, and they needed her to finish it. When she called Shaq later that day, her voice was steady. No excitement. No trepidation. "They asked me to lead," she said. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You gonna take it?" "I don't want a seat at their table," she said. "I want to rebuild the whole room." "Then you better bring your tools." And she did. 2 weeks later, the press conference was small. No stage. No applause track. Just Delilah Ray at a standing podium, in a tailored gray blazer, in the same quiet confidence she'd carried since the beginning. The room was packed, not with reporters who once ignored her, but with eyes that now saw her. "I am not here to fix a broken image," she began. "I'm here to build something that reflects who we are, not just how we're marketed." She laid out her plan, direct and unsentimental. An external ethics review board. A full freeze on biometric tracking until third-party validation. Restoration of all impacted loyalty accounts. Retraining of all customer-facing staff, not by HR, but by human rights educators. And perhaps most notably, a complete overhaul of the CRISPR Pac system. "It will not be repackaged," he said. "It will be dismantled." The room erupted, not with noise, but with a collective breath. The sound of an industry exhaling, unsure if it was watching a miracle, or just finally witnessing a correction. News anchors called it historic, but Delilah didn't want the crown. She wanted results. In the weeks that followed, she moved fast, installed her own team, slashed contracts that funneled data without oversight, partnered with advocacy groups who had once criticized the airline, turned internal dissent into design direction, and she kept Ray's table running on weekends, baking with her sister, grounding herself in something that wasn't corporate metrics or flight paths, just food, just care. Shaq stayed close, but behind the curtain. He didn't want recognition. He had started this by watching a woman get dismissed for no reason. Now he watched that same woman rewrite the story, this time as the one who holds the pen. And the public? They didn't forget. Not because they were sentimental, but because Delilah didn't give them a reason to. She didn't sell forgiveness. She showed work. A year later, Orexair returned to full operation under a new brand identity. Orex Re, with RE standing for rebuild, rethink, respect, not a rebrand, a rebirth. But in the corner of every boarding pass, under the new logo, a line of text now reads, "Built on truth, not trends." Delilah didn't ask for that. But the new design team added it anyway, because this time, it wasn't about selling comfort. It was about ensuring no one else would ever have to fight just to sit where they belong. The first decision Delilah made as CEO wasn't about planes or passengers. It wasn't about the fleet, or rebranding, or how to recover public trust. It was about who had keys to the building. She asked for a full roster of the executive board and legal counsel within her first 24 hours, and within 48 half of them were gone. Not in a blaze. No drama. Just firm, clean dismissals. The law firm that had buried her whistleblower flag behind non-disclosure clauses. Terminated. The executives who sold shares in the silence between exposure and audit. Removed. Their names didn't make headlines. She didn't need them to. She wasn't in the business of spectacle. She was in the business of repair. Delilah built something new. Not from ambition, but necessity. A board reconstructed from the ground up. Leaders from accessibility design, community advocates, data ethicists, trauma-informed consultants. Not because it looked good, Because it was right. For the first time in Orexair's long, luxury-lined history, there were no performance hires, no PR diversions, just people who understood harm, and more importantly, how to prevent it. Every department hiring, customer experience, cabin development, now had its own equity review panel. Not just oversight, authority. They didn't need permission to call out problems. They were empowered to act. That was Delilah's vision. No more whispers up the chain that die before they reach a conference call. Her policies were relentless in their clarity. Promotions required transparency audits. Passenger experience reports had to include demographic response breakdowns. Designs for premium service now began with access first, not VIP first. All this within the first 90 days. And while the media clung to the headline of first black woman CEO of a major US airline, Delilah never wore the title like a crown. She wore it like armor, lightweight, earned and ready for weather. She was never loud. That wasn't her way. She didn't lead with slogans. She led with decisions. Measured, ruthless when necessary. Not vengeful, but exact. Shaq saw it all from a quiet distance. Not because he was pulling back, but because that was always his role. To make space for those whose voices had once been made small. He came to the quarterly review sessions. Sat at the back. Took no meetings. Refused interviews. When journalists asked for a quote, he gave them silence. This wasn't his win, it was hers. But still he watched, with quiet pride, with a kind of admiration that didn't need to be spoken. The kind that comes from seeing someone walk through fire and never once ask why the door was closed to begin with. On the morning of her first official State of the Company address, the newly minted Orexair campus hummed with anticipation. The media had been invited, but the event wasn't crafted for them. It was for the people who worked there. The engineers, the cabin crews, the data analysts, the gate agents. They gathered in a converted hangar, now designed like a theater. Rows of clean white chairs facing a stage, flanked by two towering LED panels. One screen played a silent loop of archival images from the company's past, glossy advertisements, historical boarding passes, staged crew photos. The other screen, it was black, waiting. Then, the lights dimmed. Delilah stepped onto the stage. She didn't have a mic clipped to her collar. She didn't wear high heels. She wore a slate gray suit, soft loafers, no jewelry except for a single gold ring on her left index finger. Her natural hair framed her face like a halo interrupted by time and fight. She paused, looked out at the crowd, not over it, into it. And then she spoke. I remember the day I boarded a plane with a valid ticket, and someone told me I didn't belong in the seat I had paid for. No slides. No dramatic lighting cues. Just her voice. They didn't yell. They didn't insult me. They just quietly redirected me. That's how it works sometimes. The kind of injustice that doesn't need to raise its voice, because it's already been trained to whisper in every system we touch.
No one moved.
I walked to the back of that plane with the same dignity I had before boarding. But inside, something shifted. Not because I was denied, but because I realized I had spent my whole career building a system that forgot me the moment it became convenient. And then came the sentence that rewrote everything. There was one man who didn't clap when I was pushed back to economy. He just watched. But the next day he showed up. The camera panned, uninvited, to Shaq at the back. He lowered his gaze, not to hide, but to stay out of the moment that wasn't his. Delilah continued, we talk a lot about leadership, about who deserves to be in front. But sometimes, leadership begins in the back row. Sometimes, revolution doesn't start with a shout. It starts with a decision. I will not look away. The crowd didn't erupt. It didn't need to. It rose. A standing response that wasn't applause. It was alignment. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a compass now. Over the next hour, she laid out new commitments. Publicly. Promised transparency portals. Passenger redress mechanisms. A new trust network to report discriminatory experiences directly to her office. And most notably, a design lab for equity-first travel, where underrepresented travelers would co-create solutions to reshape flying for the next generation. When she stepped off the stage, the black LED screen behind her lit up for the first time. It simply read, "Welcome aboard." Later that day, Shaq found her in the break room of the redesigned staff lounge, sipping mint tea with her shoes off. You made a lot of people feel something out there, he said. Delilah smiled. It wasn't about feelings. It was about recognition. He nodded. Still, that was something. She looked at him for a long beat. You didn't do it for credit. That's why it worked. I did it, Shaq said, because I've been in rooms where I was the one being watched, and I remember every person who didn't look away. She laughed softly. Funny how much the world changes when someone simply refuses to pretend. Outside, planes taxied across the tarmac under a wide Georgia sky. But this time, they were different. Not because the machines had changed, but because the hands guiding them were no longer invisible. They had names, faces, story, and now, a leader who carried them forward. Not as statistics, not as passengers, but as people who deserve to arrive. He smiled. That small private smile, the kind only a few ever got to see. The kind that didn't come from pride, but from knowing the world had tilted just a little more toward right. As he stepped onto the plane, there was no pause at the door, no recheck of his ticket, no subtle glances, no hushed whispers to another crew member behind the desk. The attendant greeted him by name and pointed him to 1A, as easily and naturally as if it had always been his. He walked down the aisle slowly, not because of age, not because of fatigue, but because he wanted to see it. He saw a South Asian mother rocking her baby near seat 4C, being offered a warm blanket without asking. A white man in business attire, holding the door for an elderly black woman in 2D. A flight attendant showing a passenger how to use the closed captioning function on the in-seat screen. A small girl, hair in tight braids, watching an animated film in Spanish, subtitles already set. He saw balance. Not perfect, but possible. And no one was being stopped. No one was being sized up. No one was being told quietly that they didn't belong. Shaq took his seat, leaned back, and accepted the coffee when it came around again. It wasn't just good. It was real. Smooth. Deep. Warm. Just like the story that had brought it into being. He looked out the window, watching the ground crew below, as they moved efficiently. No fanfare, no drama. Just people doing their jobs, knowing that for once, the systems behind them were designed with them in mind too. This wasn't just Delilah Ray's win. It was a course correction written into air routes, stitched into uniforms, brewed into the coffee that now bore her name. It was legacy without ego. And she had done it, without fury, without spectacle, just truth. Back in Savannah, Ray's table had expanded. Still small, still humble, but now with an annex for workforce development, hospitality training, systems ethics, and entrepreneurship for young people of color, trying to enter industries that had long been boarded up against them. Delilah ran it like she ran everything else, intentionally. She still answered the kitchen phone, still corrected the spice balance herself. She didn't live at the top of a tower now. She stayed rooted, because she remembered what it was like to be told to sit at the back, even when the seat up front had your name on it. Because some people change things from the inside. Others change the inside itself. At cruising altitude, the captain came on the intercom with the usual welcome, but ended with something that caught Shaq's ear. We'd like to thank our passengers for choosing Oryx Air today. A company rebuilt, not just for speed or comfort, but for everyone who ever wondered if they were invisible. We see you, welcome aboard. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't for points. It was simply different. Shaq pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. A handwritten note Delilah had slipped him the last time they met. It wasn't long, just 2 lines. The world isn't always broken. Sometimes it's just waiting to be rebuilt by someone who remembers what it's supposed to feel like. He tucked it back in. He didn't need the applause. He didn't want the spotlight. Because sometimes change isn't measured by headlines. It's measured by what doesn't happen anymore. By the woman who boards and finds her name spelled right. By the family who's no longer asked if they belong in premium seating. By the gate that stays open just long enough for someone running to make it through. As the plane began its descent, he looked around one last time. It looked like a normal flight. But it was anything but. It was a monument in motion, without marble, without plaque. Just people in motion. Elevated, finally, without exception. And it all started with a woman waiting quietly outside first class. A woman who didn't yell, who didn't push, but who watched, who remembered, who came back, not with vengeance but with vision. And now, no gate was too high.
Not anymore.
Not ever again. They told her to wait outside. She rebuilt the entire house. Now it's your turn. If this story stirred something in you, Don't scroll past it. Start the conversation at your dinner table, your classroom, your boardroom. Because silence didn't break this system. Truth did. And today, you decide which door stays open.